The searing red sun of Eridan IV dipped below the jagged horizon, casting long shadows across the wreckage of the exploration shuttle. Smoke still curled from the twisted metal, a silent reminder of the crash that had separated 10-year-old Eliza Morgan from the rest of her family's research team just hours earlier. The forest around her pulsed with alien life, bioluminescent flowers unfurling in the growing darkness, strange creatures calling to one another in undulating tones that made her skin prickle. Eliza clutched the emergency beacon her mother had pressed into her palm during those frantic moments when the shuttle's warning systems had blared to life. "Stay hidden," her mother had whispered urgently. "Signal only when you're sure it's safe. We'll find you." Then chaos had erupted, a violent shudder, the scream of tearing metal. And suddenly, Eliza was tumbling through the emergency escape hatch into the dense undergrowth of Eridan's most unexplored region. Now, as night fell, she huddled beneath a sheltering rock formation, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger in her stomach and the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She was alone on a planet that humans had only begun to colonize 3 years earlier. Worse still, she had landed in the infamous Wild Territories, a vast expanse of ancient forest where the legendary wild dragons of Eridan were said to roam. Dragons. The word itself sent a shiver down her spine. Eliza had seen images of the domesticated specimens kept in the research compounds, sleek, scaled creatures with iridescent wings and intelligent eyes. But the wild dragons were different, larger, more ferocious, completely untamed. No one approaches the wild dragons. Her father, the expedition's lead xenobiologist, had warned her countless times. Not if they want to live. A deep, resonant roar echoed through the forest, so powerful it seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath her. Eliza froze, her breath catching in her throat. Another roar followed, but this one sounded different, ragged at the edges, almost like a cry of pain. Curiosity, that dangerous companion that had gotten her into trouble more times than she could count, tugged at her, against every instinct for self-preservation. Eliza crept from her hiding place and moved toward the sound, careful to stay low and quiet among the phosphorescent underbrush. The sight that greeted her, as she peered through a curtain of hanging vines, stole her breath away. In a small clearing, illuminated by the 3 moons of Eridan that had begun to rise, lay the largest dragon she had ever seen. Its scales gleamed like polished obsidian in the silver light, interrupted by streaks of deep blue that seemed to pulse with an inner light of their own. Its wingspan, even folded against its massive body, must have stretched wider than the shuttle that had brought her family to this expedition. But it was not the dragon's size that drew Eliza's attention. It was the trail of dark liquid, blood, she realized with a start, that dripped from its front claw. The great beast was injured, its massive head lowered to the ground as it periodically released those pain-filled cries that had drawn her to the clearing. Eliza should have retreated. She should have run as fast and as far as her legs could carry her. Instead, she found herself stepping into the clearing, moved by a compassion that overrode her fear. The dragon's head whipped around at her approach, its eyes, startlingly bright against its dark scales, fixing on her with an intensity that made her freeze mid-step. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they stared at each other, predator and prey, though Eliza couldn't have said which was which in that silent exchange. Then, the dragon did something unexpected. It slumped back to the ground, as if the effort of remaining alert was too much for its injured state. A soft, almost plaintive rumble emerged from its throat. "You're hurt," Eliza whispered, taking another careful step forward. The beacon in her pocket felt heavy, a reminder of safety, of the human world that would tell her to run, not approach. But she couldn't tear her eyes away from the dragon's wounded claw. Drawing closer, she could see the problem, a massive thorn, as long as her forearm, embedded deep in the dragon's palm, between the scaled armor that protected its claw No wonder it was in such pain. The thorn must have come from one of Eridan's defensive plants, notorious for their toxic properties. "I can help you," she said softly, though she doubted the creature could understand her words. "But you have to let me." The dragon's gaze never left her as she inched closer, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure it must hear it. When she was just a few feet away, the massive creature extended its injured claw toward her, a gesture so deliberate it took her breath away. It was trusting her, or at least, it was desperate enough to accept help from an unlikely source. With trembling hands, Eliza examined the wound. The thorn had penetrated deeply, and the area around it was swollen and hot to the touch. She remembered her mother's emergency medical training sessions, a standard requirement for all family members on exploration missions. "This is going to hurt," she warned, meeting the dragon's gaze. "But I promise I'll be quick." Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Eliza gripped the exposed end of the thorn with both hands and pulled with all her strength. The dragon let out a deafening roar, its wings unfurling partially in pain and surprise. For one terrifying moment, Eliza thought it might lash out at her, but it remained still, trembling with the effort of restraint. With a sickening sound, the thorn came free, followed by a gush of dark blood. Acting quickly, Eliza tore a strip from the bottom of her expedition shirt and wrapped it around the dragon's wound, applying pressure as her mother had taught her to do for puncture injuries. "There," she said, her voice shaking with adrenaline and relief. "That should help." The dragon curled its claw inward, examining the makeshift bandage with what Eliza could have sworn was curiosity. Then it lowered its massive head until it was eye level with her, so close she could feel its warm breath on her face, see the intricate patterns within its irises. A rumble emanated from deep in its chest, different from the pained sounds it had made earlier. This was softer, almost grateful. Eliza reached out a hand, then hesitated. Every safety protocol her parents had drilled into her screamed that touching a wild dragon was suicide. But something in the creature's eyes, an intelligence, a connection, made her continue the gesture. Her small palm came to rest on the dragon's snout, feeling the warmth and the surprising smoothness of its scales. The dragon closed its eyes briefly at her touch, and Eliza felt something shift between them, a bridge forming across the vast divide that separated their species. A sharp crack from the forest behind them shattered the moment. The dragon's eyes snapped open, its body tensing as it scanned the darkness beyond the clearing. From the undergrowth emerged a pack of shadowy creatures, sleek, six-legged predators with elongated snouts and glowing yellow eyes. Stalkers. Eliza's mind supplied, remembering her father's briefings on Eridan's dangerous fauna. Pack hunters that typically avoided dragons, but would certainly see a small human as easy prey. Fear froze her in place as the lead stalker crept forward, its eyes fixed hungrily on her. The dragon, still weakened from its injury, struggled to rise to its full height. In that moment, Eliza faced a stark choice: run and save herself, leaving the injured dragon to potentially face the pack alone, or stay and face an almost certain death. The stalker lunged. Eliza didn't run. Instead, she grabbed a fallen branch near her feet and swung it with all her might, connecting with the stalker's snout. The creature yelped in surprise, backing up momentarily. A deafening roar shook the clearing as the dragon, despite its injury, reared up to its full, terrifying height. With a sweep of its tail, it knocked two stalkers aside like toys. The pack hesitated, reassessing the threat, then slowly began to back away, melting into the shadows from which they had emerged. Breathing hard, Eliza dropped the branch, her hands shaking with delayed terror. The dragon lowered itself back to the ground, its strength seemingly depleted by the brief display of power. "Thank you," she whispered, moving back to its side. I think we just saved each other. The night grew colder as Eliza maintained her vigil beside the dragon. She had rebandaged its wound with a cleaner strip of cloth from her shirt and watched with relief as the bleeding finally stopped. The dragon's breathing had steadied, though it remained alert, its gaze periodically scanning the forest around them. Eliza shivered in the alien night, her thin expedition clothing inadequate against Eridan's dropping temperatures. Seeing her discomfort, the dragon shifted its massive body, creating a space between its foreleg and its chest, a sheltered nook radiating warmth. An invitation. Cautiously, Eliza crawled into the space, marveling at the heat emanating from the dragon's body. Its scales, which had looked so hard from a distance, were surprisingly flexible up close, moving with each breath the creature took. I should give you a name, she murmured, fighting to keep her eyes open as exhaustion began to claim her. The dragon's scales caught the moonlight, shimmering with hidden constellations of blue against the black. Starlight, she decided. I'll call you Starlight. The dragon, Starlight, rumbled softly in response, a sound that vibrated through his body and into hers, lulling her toward sleep. My family will be looking for me, she told him drowsily. They might not understand about you. Her eyelids grew heavier. People are afraid of what they don't understand. As she drifted toward sleep, cradled in the impossible warmth of a wild dragon's protection, Eliza thought she felt Starlight's consciousness brush against her own, a gentle touch of alien thought that carried no words but conveyed a single, unmistakable sentiment. You are safe now. Dawn broke over Eridan IV in a spectacular display of twin sunrises. First, the smaller red sun. Then, its larger golden companion, bathing the forest in contrasting hues of crimson and amber. Eliza woke to find herself still nestled against Starlight's warm scales, the dragon's wing partially extended over her, like a living tent. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. The crash, the injured dragon, the stalkers. She sat up quickly, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. Starlight was awake, his bright eyes watching her with that same intelligent curiosity she had noticed the night before. His injured claw lay extended before him, the makeshift bandage now stained dark with dried blood. But when he flexed his talons experimentally, Eliza was relieved to see the movement appeared less painful. Good morning, she said, her voice rough from sleep and thirst. How are you feeling? The dragon rumbled low in his throat, then slowly rose to his feet, his massive body unfurling like a living mountain. Eliza scrambled up as well, suddenly aware of how tiny she was in comparison. Standing at his full height, Starlight was easily 3 times taller than her father, the largest man she knew. A pang of homesickness struck her at the thought of her parents. They must be frantic with worry by now. The emergency beacon still sat unused in her pocket. She had been too afraid to activate it the night before, unsure of what predators its signal might attract. But in the light of day, with Starlight beside her, the risk seemed less daunting. I need to let my family know I'm alive, she explained, pulling out the small device. They'll come for me. Starlight tilted his head, watching as she pressed the activation sequence. The beacon emitted a soft beep, then began to pulse with a rhythmic blue light, a signal that would lead the rescue team straight to her location. They might be afraid of you, she warned, looking up at the dragon's imposing figure. Humans. We haven't had much contact with wild dragons like you. Starlight snorted, a puff of warm air ruffling her hair. Then, to Eliza's surprise, he lowered his massive body to the ground and extended his uninjured front leg toward her, a clear invitation. You want me to climb on? She asked incredulously. The dragon's eyes, bright with intelligence, blinked once in what she took as affirmation, heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Eliza carefully climbed onto Starlight's foreleg, then scrambled up to position herself just behind his neck, where a natural depression between his shoulder blades formed a seat of sorts. His scales were smooth beneath her hands, warm and alive. Nothing like the cold, reptilian texture she had imagined. "Where are we going?" she whispered, gripping tightly as he rose to his feet. Her question was answered as Starlight spread his enormous wings, the translucent membranes catching the morning light like stained glass. With a powerful downward stroke that nearly unseated her, they were airborne, rising above the forest canopy into the clear, Eridan sky. Eliza gasped, partly in terror, partly in wonder. The world fell away beneath them, the crash site visible now as a dark scar in the otherwise unbroken expanse of emerald forest. In the distance, she could make out the gleaming structures of the human settlement, a collection of domes and towers that seemed impossibly small from this height. But Starlight wasn't flying toward the settlement. Instead, he banked toward a range of craggy mountains that rose sharply from the forest's edge, territory that, as far as Eliza knew, had never been explored by the human colonists. They soared over deep valleys and razor-sharp ridges until Starlight began a controlled descent toward what appeared to be a sheer rock face. As they drew closer, Eliza realized that what had looked solid from a distance was actually the entrance to a massive cave, cleverly concealed by overhanging stone. Starlight landed with surprising gentleness on a wide ledge before the cave entrance. Eliza slid from his back on shaky legs, overwhelmed by the experience of flight and the realization that she was probably the first human to ever set foot in this remote location. "Is this where you live?" she asked, peering into the shadowy depths of the cave. In response, Starlight nudged her gently toward the entrance with his snout. Taking a deep breath, Eliza stepped into the darkness, the dragon following close behind. For a few moments, she could see nothing. Then, as her eyes adjusted, she gasped in wonder. The cave opened into a vast cavern, whose walls and ceiling were embedded with thousands of bioluminescent crystals, bathing the space in a soft, blue-green light. Stalactites hung like frozen waterfalls from the domed ceiling, while crystalline formations rose from the floor in fantastic shapes. But it was what occupied the cavern that truly stole Eliza's breath away. Dragons, dozens of them, in various sizes and colors, though none quite as large or magnificent as Starlight. Some rested on rocky outcroppings. Others glided gracefully through the air between different levels of the cavern. Smaller dragons, juveniles, she guessed, darted playfully around the larger ones. A dragon colony, a secret society hidden away from human eyes. As Starlight led her deeper into the cavern, the other dragons took notice of their arrival. Many reacted with obvious alarm at the sight of a human, rearing back or emitting warning growls. Hatchlings were quickly shepherded behind protective wings, and several of the larger dragons moved to intercept their path. One dragon in particular, its scales a burnished copper that gleamed in the crystal light, approached with a threatening posture, wings partially extended to appear larger. It fixed Eliza with a hostile glare before turning to Starlight, emitting a series of complex sounds that clearly constituted some form of communication. Starlight responded with his own series of rumbles and growls, at one point extending his injured claw, showing the bandage Eliza had applied. The copper dragon examined the wound, then turned its penetrating gaze back to Eliza, who stood her ground despite her racing heart. A tense silence fell over the cavern as the two dragons appeared to reach an impasse in their debate. Then, unexpectedly, a third dragon approached, smaller than the others, with scales of pale silver that seemed to capture and reflect the bioluminescent light. It moved with a halting gait, and Eliza noticed with a shock that one of its wings was badly damaged, the membrane torn and scarred in a pattern that looked disturbingly like weapon fire. The silver dragon positioned itself between Eliza and the copper one, making a soft trilling sound that somehow conveyed both authority and compassion. It extended its neck toward Eliza in what seemed like a gesture of greeting or assessment. Instinctively, Eliza raised her hand, palm outward, mimicking the gesture she had made with Starlight the previous night. The silver dragon hesitated, then pressed its snout briefly against her hand. The contact lasted only a moment, but in that instant, Eliza felt a distinct presence in her mind, alien, yet somehow familiar, conveying not words but impressions, curiosity, caution, and a hint of hope. The silver dragon withdrew, then turned to the others, making a series of definitive sounds that caused the tension in the cavern to visibly dissipate. The copper dragon backed down, though it continued to watch Eliza warily. Starlight rumbled what sounded like approval, then guided Eliza toward a secluded alcove off the main cavern, where a pool of clear water glimmered in the crystalline light. Realizing suddenly how parched she was, Eliza knelt and drank gratefully, the water sweet and cold on her tongue. As she quenched her thirst, she tried to process the magnitude of what she had discovered. A hidden dragon colony, intelligent enough to communicate with each other, perhaps even capable of some form of telepathic contact. It was beyond anything the human scientists on Eridan had theorized about the planet's most mysterious inhabitants. And she, Eliza Morgan, was the only human who knew of their existence. The implications were staggering. If the research teams learned of this place, they would descend en masse, eager to study, catalog, and ultimately control these magnificent creatures. The dragon's sanctuary would be violated, their freedom compromised. Yet her parents and the other scientists needed to understand that the wild dragons weren't mindless beasts to be feared or hunted. They were intelligent, social beings with a rich, hidden culture of their own. How could she bridge these two worlds? How could she protect Starlight and his kind while helping humans understand the truth about them? Before she could ponder these questions further, Starlight returned to the alcove carrying something in his mouth. He deposited it carefully at her feet, a cluster of fruit-like objects with tough outer rinds and a sweet aroma. "For me?" she asked in surprise. The dragon nudged the food toward her with his snout, making a sound that could only be interpreted as encouragement. Hunger, overriding caution. Eliza picked up one of the fruits and bit into it, discovering a juicy, tangy flesh inside that instantly revitalized her. As she ate, Starlight settled beside her, his massive body curled protectively around her small form. In that moment, despite the extraordinary circumstances and the uncertainty of her situation, Eliza felt an overwhelming sense of trust in the dragon who had brought her to his hidden world. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The girl who had removed a thorn from a dragon's claw, and the dragon who had shown her a world beyond imagination. The day passed in a blur of discovery as Eliza explored the dragon colony under Starlight's watchful protection. The initial hostility of the other dragons gradually gave way to cautious curiosity, particularly among the younger ones, who would dart close to inspect her before retreating to safety. The silver dragon, whom Eliza had mentally named Moonwing for its luminous scales, seemed to hold a position of authority within the colony. It often intervened when other dragons became too aggressive or inquisitive in their approach to the human visitor. Through observation, Eliza began to discern patterns in the dragon's behavior, social hierarchies, family units, even what appeared to be educational activities where adult dragons demonstrated hunting and flying techniques to the juveniles. Her father would have been fascinated by these insights, she thought with a pang of homesickness. As the day waned, Eliza's thoughts turned increasingly to her family. The emergency beacon had been active for hours now. Surely the rescue teams would be closing in on her location. But the beacon remained in the forest clearing where Starlight had found her, while she was now deep within the mountain range, in a place humans had never set foot. "I need to go back," she explained to Starlight as they rested near the cavern entrance, watching the Eridan sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "My family will be looking for me where I activated the beacon." The dragon regarded her thoughtfully, then rose to his feet, once again offering his back. Despite having flown with him earlier, Eliza still felt a thrill of nervous excitement as she climbed onto his shoulders. This time, she settled more confidently into the natural seat behind his neck, gripping firmly as he launched them into the evening sky. The flight back to the forest clearing was swift, Starlight's powerful wings carrying them effortlessly through the cooling air. As they descended toward the spot where Eliza had spent the previous night, she noticed with alarm that the underbrush at the forest's edge was disturbed. Signs of recent human activity. "They've been here," she whispered as Starlight landed. "The rescue team." The dragon tensed beneath her, his head swiveling to scan their surroundings. The clearing was empty, but nearby, Eliza could make out faint voices and the beam of flashlights cutting through the gathering darkness. Sliding from Starlight's back, she faced a moment of decision. She could call out now, alert the rescue team to her presence, be reunited with her family, and return to the safety of the human settlement. But what of Starlight? Would the rescue team react with fear or violence at the sight of a wild dragon? "You should hide," she told him urgently. "They won't understand." The dragon made no move to leave. Instead, he lowered his massive head until his eyes were level with hers, conveying with his steady gaze what words could not. He would not abandon her. Before Eliza could argue further, a beam of light swept across the clearing, catching them in its harsh glare. "Contact!" a voice shouted. "I've got visual on the girl!" Figures emerged from the forest, 6 members of the colony's security team in their distinctive blue uniforms, armed with stun rifles. At the sight of Starlight, they immediately dropped into defensive positions, weapons raised. "Eliza, don't move!" called the team leader, a woman named Captain Reeves, whom Eliza recognized from the colony. "We're going to get you out of there!" "Wait!" Eliza cried, stepping protectively in front of Starlight. "Don't shoot! He's my friend!" Her words were met with disbelieving stares. Behind the security team, more figures emerged from the forest, and Eliza's heart leapt at the sight of her parents, their faces drawn with worry and exhaustion. "Eliza!" Her mother broke away from the group, rushing toward her before being caught and held back by one of the security officers. "Ma'am, please stay behind us," the officer urged. "That's a wild dragon, extremely dangerous." "He's not dangerous," Eliza insisted. "His name is Starlight, and he saved me." Her father pushed forward, his scientist's curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. "Eliza, what are you saying? That dragon, it hasn't harmed you?" "No. Dad, I helped him. He had a thorn in his claw." She gestured to the now blood-stained bandage, still wrapped around Starlight's talon. "And then, he protected me from stalkers and took me to where the dragons live. There's a whole colony of them in the mountains." A murmur ran through the rescue team at this revelation. Eliza's father, Dr. Thomas Morgan, exchanged a meaningful glance with her mother, Dr. Sophia Morgan, both recognizing the scientific significance of what their daughter was claiming. "Lower your weapons," Dr. Thomas instructed the security team. "You're making the dragon defensive." "Sir, with all due respect," Captain Reeves began. "That's my daughter standing next to that dragon, Captain," he interrupted firmly. "If she says it's not a threat, I'm inclined to believe her." Reluctantly, the security team lowered their stun rifles, though they remained tense and ready. Slowly, Eliza's parents approached, their gazes fixed on Starlight, who remained unnervingly still, except for the occasional swish of his tail. "Incredible," breathed her father as he drew closer. "The size, the coloration, like nothing in our records." "He understands us," Eliza said. "Not our words, exactly, but our intentions. And the dragons have their own language. They communicate with each other. And sometimes, she hesitated, unsure how to explain the brief mental contact she had experienced with Moonwing. Sometimes what, sweetheart? Her mother prompted gently. Sometimes they can share thoughts, Eliza finished. Not like talking, but feelings, images. Her father's eyes widened at this. Telepathic capabilities. That would explain so much about their advanced social structures despite limited vocalization patterns. Thomas, Sophia cautioned. Let's focus on getting Eliza home safely. We can discuss scientific implications later. No, Mom. You don't understand, Eliza insisted. Starlight brought me back here because he knew you'd be looking for me. But I promised I'd help him too. People need to understand that the wild dragons aren't monsters to be feared. They're intelligent and peaceful, unless threatened. As if to emphasize her point, Starlight slowly lowered himself to the ground in a non-threatening posture, his bright eyes moving between Eliza and her parents. He's injured, Sophia noted, her medical training kicking in as she observed the bandaged claw. That dressing needs to be changed. To everyone's astonishment, she reached into her medical kit and approached the dragon with professional composure. May I? She asked, meeting Starlight's gaze directly. The dragon extended his injured claw toward her, the same gesture of trust he had shown Eliza the night before. With careful movements, Sophia removed the makeshift bandage and examined the wound. Clean puncture, no signs of infection. You did a good job with emergency treatment. Eliza. She applied a proper antiseptic and a fresh bandage from her kit, her hands steady despite the extraordinary nature of her patient. The security team watched in disbelief as the colony's chief medical officer treated a wild dragon as calmly as she would any human patient. When she finished, Sophia stepped back, and Starlight flexed his claw experimentally, rumbling what sounded distinctly like appreciation. Remarkable, Thomas murmured, his scientist's mind clearly racing with the implications of what he was witnessing. Eliza, you said there's an entire colony? She nodded eagerly. Hidden in the mountains, there are dragons of all sizes and colors, and one of them, the one I call Moonwing, seems to be their leader. It has a damaged wing. Dad, I think it might have been shot. Her father's expression darkened. There have been unauthorized hunting expeditions into the wild territories. We've tried to stop them. But that's why the dragons hide, Eliza realized. They're afraid of us. Captain Reeves, who had been listening intently, stepped forward. The Colony Council needs to hear about this. If the wild dragons are intelligent beings capable of communication and cooperation, that changes everything about our protocols. It changes everything about our understanding of Eridan's ecosystem, Thomas agreed. We've been studying the wrong questions all along. As the adults discussed the scientific and ethical implications, Eliza turned to Starlight, who had remained remarkably patient throughout the exchange. She placed a hand on his snout, feeling the now familiar warmth of his scales. They're starting to understand, she told him softly. This is just the beginning. The dragon's bright eyes held hers, and once again she felt that peculiar sensation, not quite words, but a definite impression of sentiment. Trust grows slowly, but it begins with a single act of courage. Whether the thought was Starlight's or her own, Eliza couldn't be sure. But as she stood in the clearing, bridging the gap between two worlds that had long existed in fear of one another, she knew that removing a thorn from a dragon's claw had been only the first step in a much longer journey. That night, against all standard protocols but with the reluctant agreement of the security team, Eliza and her parents camped in the clearing rather than returning immediately to the colony. Starlight remained with them, a massive guardian that the security officers watched with a mixture of awe and lingering wariness. Around the campfire, Eliza recounted her adventure in detail, the crash, finding Starlight injured, their mutual protection against the stalkers, and her incredible visit to the hidden dragon colony. The way they interact with each other, Dad, it's complex, organized. The adults teach the younger ones. They have distinct personalities, and the cavern where they live. It's beautiful, full of these glowing crystals, unlike anything I've seen in the human settlement. Thomas listened intently, occasionally making notes on his datapad. This could revolutionize our understanding of draconic intelligence. All our studies have been based on the few specimens we've managed to observe from a distance, or the juveniles raised in captivity. But a natural social structure in their native habitat. Those juveniles in the research compound, Eliza interrupted, a troubling thought occurring to her. Where did they come from? Her parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. They were found abandoned, her mother said carefully. Or at least, that's what we were told. But what if they weren't abandoned? Eliza pressed. What if they were taken? Her father's expression grew serious. That's a disturbing possibility, and one we'll need to investigate. If the wild dragons are as intelligent as you describe, removing their young would be... He trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. It would be kidnapping, Eliza finished firmly. Starlight, who had been resting at the edge of the firelight, raised his head at her words, a low rumble emanating from his chest. He understands more than we realize, Sophia observed. The question is, how do we proceed from here? This discovery has enormous implications, both scientifically and for colony policy. We need to establish communication, Thomas said decisively. Real, reciprocal communication. If these dragons are capable of the kind of telepathic exchange Eliza described, perhaps we can develop that connection. But we have to protect them too, Eliza insisted. If everyone in the colony learns about the dragon sanctuary, some might try to exploit them or disturb their home. Her father nodded thoughtfully. You're right. We'll need to proceed carefully. For now, this stays between us, Captain Reeves, and the necessary members of the Science Council. Captain Reeves, who had been keeping a respectful distance while maintaining watch, approached the family circle. Dr. Morgan, I've been thinking about the security implications. If we're going to establish any kind of diplomatic contact with these dragons, we need to ensure their territory is protected from unauthorized incursions. What are you suggesting, Captain? Sophia asked. A restricted conservation zone. No entry without specific clearance, ostensibly for ecological research. It would give us a legitimate reason to patrol the boundaries without revealing the true nature of what we're protecting. Thomas nodded approvingly. That could work. We'd need Governor Chen's support, but he's always been sympathetic to conservation efforts. And the dragons in the research compound? Eliza asked. If they were taken from their families, we'll investigate their origins, her mother promised. If they were wrongfully removed from the wild, we'll find a way to reintegrate them with their kind. As the adults continued to plan, Eliza moved to sit beside Starlight, leaning against his warm scales. The dragon curled his tail protectively around her, creating a barrier between her and the rest of the world. We're going to make things right, she whispered to him. I promise. Starlight rumbled softly in response, and Eliza felt herself drifting toward sleep, exhausted by the day's events, but filled with a sense of purpose she had never known before. In the morning, decisions would be made, plans set in motion, but for now, in this moment of quiet between human and dragon, a new understanding was already taking root, one that would forever change the relationship between the colonists of Eridan the 4-4 and the magnificent creatures with whom they shared this world. Dawn broke over the clearing, revealing Starlight still vigilant beside the sleeping human child. As Eliza stirred, the dragon's attention shifted to movement at the forest's edge. Reinforcements from the colony had arrived, including several members of the Science Council, eager to witness the unprecedented dragon interaction for themselves. Among them was Dr. Eleanor Winters, the colony's chief xenobiologist and a longtime colleague of Eliza's parents. Her eyes widened at the sight of Starlight, his massive form dwarfing the humans who had spent the night in his company. "Extraordinary," she breathed, approaching with cautious steps. "Thomas, Sophia, when Captain Reeves reported your findings, I hardly dared believe it." "It's all true, Eleanor," Thomas confirmed, rising to greet his colleague. "Everything Eliza told us about the dragon's intelligence, their social structure, we've been working from an entirely flawed paradigm." As the scientists conferred, Eliza sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Starlight nudged her gently with his snout, a greeting that brought a smile to her face despite the commotion around them. "Good morning to you too," she murmured, placing her hand on his scales. Dr. Winters observed this interaction with fascination. "The bond between them is remarkable. How did you say this began, Eliza?" "I removed a thorn from his claw," she explained, indicating the bandage her mother had applied. "He was in pain, and I wanted to help." "A simple act of compassion," Eleanor mused. "Perhaps that's what's been missing from our approach all along. We've been so focused on studying them as subjects that we never considered relating to them as equals." The day that followed was one of careful diplomacy. With Eliza acting as an unofficial intermediary, the scientists began the delicate process of establishing a non-threatening presence around Starlight. They documented his responses to various stimuli, his methods of communication, and most importantly, his continued protective behavior toward Eliza. By midday, a decision had been reached. A small team, including Eliza and her parents, would attempt to visit the dragon colony with Starlight as their guide. The goal was not research, at least not primarily, but rather the beginning of diplomatic contact between the two intelligent species sharing Eridan IV. "I should warn you," Eliza told the assembled team as they prepared for the journey. "Not all the dragons are as accepting as Starlight. Some of them were really suspicious of me." "Understandable," her father replied. "If they've had negative encounters with humans before, they have every reason to be cautious." Captain Reeves, who would be accompanying them with two of her most level-headed officers, added, "We'll follow Eliza's lead. No weapons will be drawn unless there's an immediate threat to human life. And even then, non-lethal measures only." The journey to the mountain cave system was made partly on foot and partly using the colony's all-terrain vehicles. Following Starlight, who led the way with surprising patience, occasionally circling back to ensure the humans were keeping pace. As they approached the concealed entrance to the dragon sanctuary, Eliza felt a growing nervousness. Would the dragons accept these additional humans? Would Moonwing understand that her parents and the others came in peace? Starlight paused at the cave entrance, emitting a series of resonant calls that echoed through the stone corridor, announcing their arrival. Eliza realized. "Remember," she cautioned the group, "move slowly, no sudden gestures, and try to project peaceful thoughts, I guess." They seemed to sense emotions. Her father raised an eyebrow at this but nodded. Noted. Calm, non-threatening demeanor. They entered the tunnel, single file. Eliza leading with Starlight, her parents directly behind, followed by Dr. Winters, and the security team bringing up the rear. As the passage opened into the vast crystalline cavern, gasps of wonder escaped from every human throat. "Incredible," Eleanor whispered, her scientist's composure momentarily forgotten as she took in the majesty of the dragon habitat. The bioluminescence, the scale of it. Nothing in our records suggested anything like this. Their arrival had not gone unnoticed. Dragons of various sizes and colors were already gathering, some perched on high ledges, others circling warily in the open space of the cavern. Juveniles were once again shepherded behind protective wings, and a familiar tension filled the air. The copper dragon that had confronted Eliza on her first visit swooped down to land before the human delegation, its posture unmistakably challenging. It roared, a sound so powerful it seemed to vibrate through the stone beneath their feet. Captain Reeves' hand instinctively moved toward her stun rifle, but Eliza quickly stepped forward. "No, let me handle this," she insisted, then turned to face the copper dragon. "We come as friends," she said clearly, though she knew it wasn't her words, but her intent that mattered. "We want to understand, to help." The copper dragon snorted dismissively, its gaze sweeping over the humans with obvious distrust. A hush fell over the cavern as another dragon approached, the silver one, Moonwing, moving with its distinctive halting gait. It positioned itself between the copper dragon and the humans, just as it had done during Eliza's first visit. This time, however, Moonwing did something unexpected. It extended its damaged wing fully, displaying the scarred membrane for all to see. The pattern of damage was unmistakable to anyone familiar with human weapons, a spray pattern from a percussion rifle, designed to bring down large game. "Someone shot at it," Thomas said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Deliberately." Moonwing's bright eyes fixed on him. And then, slowly, deliberately, it lowered its head until it was at eye level with Eliza's father. For a long moment, they regarded each other, scientist and dragon, representatives of their respective species. Then, Thomas did something that took everyone by surprise. He knelt, bowing his head in a gesture of profound respect and regret. "On behalf of my kind," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed cavern, "I apologize for the harm that has been done to you and your people." A murmur of surprise ran through the human delegation at this unprecedented diplomatic gesture. Even Captain Reeves, trained to maintain composure in all situations, appeared momentarily stunned. Moonwing remained still, studying the kneeling scientist with an unreadable expression. Then, with careful movements, it extended its neck and gently touched its snout to Thomas's forehead, a gesture that mirrored the contact it had made with Eliza during her first visit. Thomas gasped, his eyes widening as he experienced the same mental connection Eliza had described. That brief, alien touch of consciousness, carrying impressions rather than words. When Moonwing withdrew, Thomas remained kneeling for several seconds, visibly processing the experience. When he finally rose, his expression was one of profound wonder. "Did you feel it?" Eliza asked eagerly. Her father nodded, seemingly at a loss for words. I felt understanding, caution, but also possibility." The tension in the cavern had shifted subtly. While the copper dragon and several others maintained their defensive postures, a number of dragons had relaxed their stances, watching the proceedings with what appeared to be curiosity rather than hostility. Taking advantage of this opening, Sophia stepped forward, addressing Moonwing directly. "We want to establish a protected area around your territory, a place where no humans can enter without permission, where your people will be safe from those who would harm you." Moonwing tilted its head, its bright eyes moving between the various humans, as if assessing their sincerity. Then, it made a series of complex vocalizations that seemed directed at the assembled dragons. A debate ensued, different dragons calling out in their resonant voices, some seemingly in agreement, others in opposition. The copper dragon was particularly vocal, its skepticism evident even to the humans, who couldn't understand the specific communication. Throughout this exchange, Starlight remained by Eliza's side, occasionally adding his own voice to the discussion. She wished she could understand what was being said, but the emotions were clear enough. Uncertainty, hope, fear, possibility, all the complex feelings that arose when two vastly different worlds first made meaningful contact. Finally, Moonwing raised its head in a gesture that silenced the others. It approached the human delegation once more, this time accompanied by 3 other dragons. One, a deep emerald green, another with scales of burnished gold, and the third, an iridescent blue that seemed to shift colors with each movement. Together, the 4 dragons formed a semicircle before the humans, their posture neither threatening nor submissive, but equal, a council meeting with representatives of another species. Moonwing looked directly at Eliza, then at her parents, and finally at Dr. Winters and Captain Reeves. It made a single, definitive sound, then extended its neck toward Eliza's father once more. Understanding the invitation, Thomas stepped forward and placed his hand on Moonwing's snout, closing his eyes as the mental contact was established. This time, the connection lasted longer. Thomas's expression shifted through various emotions: surprise, understanding, concern, and finally, resolve. When Moonwing withdrew, he turned to the others with newfound purpose. "They are willing to establish formal contact with our colony," he announced. "But they have conditions." "What kind of conditions?" Captain Reeves asked, her professional caution reasserting itself. "First, the protection of their territory, as we discussed. Second, they want information about the young dragons being held in our research compound. And third," he paused, glancing at Eliza with a smile, "they request that Eliza serve as the primary liaison between our species." "Me?" Eliza exclaimed, though in truth, she had hoped for exactly this role. "You proved yourself trustworthy when you helped Starlight," her father explained. "You showed compassion when others might have shown fear. In their eyes, that makes you uniquely qualified." "But I'm just a kid," she protested weakly, even as a thrill of excitement coursed through her. "Perhaps that's precisely why you're the right choice," her mother suggested. "You approached Starlight without the preconceptions that we adults might carry. You saw him as he was, not as what we feared he might be." Dr. Winters nodded in agreement. The history of first contact scenarios, even just between different human cultures, shows that children often make the best ambassadors. They're adaptable, open-minded, and remarkably good at picking up new forms of communication. Captain Reeves, ever practical, added, "Of course, she'd have protection and supervision. This would be a carefully monitored diplomatic mission, not a solo venture." As the adults discussed the logistics, Eliza turned to Starlight, who had been watching the proceedings with those bright, intelligent eyes. "What do you think?" she asked him softly. "Could I really be an ambassador between humans and dragons?" The dragon lowered his massive head until his eyes were level with hers. In that gaze, Eliza saw what needed no telepathic bond to communicate: absolute confidence in her, the same trust she had earned when she removed the thorn from his claw. And in that moment, standing in the crystal-lit cavern with dragons soaring overhead and her future stretching before her in ways she had never imagined, 10-year-old Eliza Morgan made her decision. "I'll do it," she announced, turning back to the adults. "I'll be the liaison between humans and dragons." Her parents exchanged a glance of pride mixed with concern, the eternal parental response to a child taking the first steps toward her own destiny. "Then it's settled," her father said. "We'll begin drafting the formal agreements when we return to the colony. This marks a new chapter in the history of Eridan IV, one of cooperation rather than fear." As if in response to his words, the dragons of the colony let out a harmonious chorus of calls that resonated through the cavern, not threatening roars, but something more musical, almost celebratory. Eliza felt Starlight's consciousness brush against her own once more, carrying a single, powerful impression. Beginnings are always the hardest part of any journey, but we have taken the first step together. She smiled up at her dragon friend, placing her small hand on his massive claw where, just days ago, she had removed a painful thorn and inadvertently changed the course of 2 species' shared history. "Together," she agreed aloud. "That's how we'll go forward from here." In the months that followed, the agreement between the dragon colony and the human settlement was formalized. The mountains and surrounding forest where the dragons made their home were designated as the Protected Draconic Conservation Zone, with access strictly limited to authorized personnel. Eliza, true to her word, served as the primary liaison between the two species. 3 times each week, she would journey to the dragon sanctuary, sometimes accompanied by her parents or other scientists, sometimes with only Captain Reeves or another security officer as escort. Her relationship with Starlight deepened into a bond that transcended mere friendship. The massive black dragon became her constant companion during these visits, and gradually, she began to develop the ability to sense his thoughts more clearly, moving beyond vague impressions to more specific concepts. Other humans, too, began to establish connections with particular dragons. Dr. Winters formed a special bond with the emerald green dragon from Moonwing's council, whom she named Verdant. Through their developing mental link, she learned more about dragon physiology and social structures than years of conventional research could have provided. Most significantly, an investigation into the origins of the juvenile dragons at the research compound confirmed Eliza's suspicions. They had indeed been taken from the wild, not abandoned as previously claimed. The culprits were a group of private collectors who had been secretly funding illegal capture operations on Eridan IV and other colonized planets. With this revelation, the colony administration, under Governor Chen's leadership, made the controversial but ultimately celebrated decision to work toward reintegrating the captive dragons with their wild counterparts. The reintegration process began with the youngest captives, 3 hatchlings who had been in the compound for less than a year. Eliza and Starlight accompanied them on their journey back to the sanctuary, where they were greeted by the colony with a mixture of caution and joy. "Will they remember how to be wild dragons?" Eliza had asked Starlight as they watched the young ones being introduced to the cavern. The impression she received in return was complex but clear. Some knowledge lies deeper than memory. They will remember what it means to be free. And indeed, within weeks, the young dragons were soaring through the cavern with their wild-born peers, their captivity becoming a fading memory. For the older captives, the transition would be more challenging, requiring a gradual process of reintroduction and rehabilitation. But with each successful reunion, the trust between dragons and humans grew stronger. On a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after her fateful encounter with Starlight, Eliza stood at the entrance to the dragon sanctuary, watching as a group of colony children, carefully selected for their open-mindedness and supervised by their parents, were introduced to the youngest and gentlest members of the dragon colony. It had been her idea, this carefully orchestrated meeting between the children of both species, and though it had met with resistance from more conservative elements in both communities, the success was undeniable. The human children approached the young dragons with wonder rather than fear, while the dragon hatchlings displayed a playful curiosity that transcended species boundaries. "You've accomplished something remarkable here," her father said, joining her at the cavern entrance. 6 months ago, humans and dragons existed in mutual fear and ignorance. Now look at them. Eliza smiled, watching as a young boy tentatively offered a fruit to a copper-colored hatchling, his face lighting up when the small dragon gently took it from his hand. "It wasn't just me," she said. "It was all of us. And it started with a thorn." "Sometimes the smallest actions have the most profound consequences," her father agreed. "You taught us all an important lesson, Eliza. When we approach the unknown with compassion rather than fear, we open doors to possibilities we never imagined." A shadow passed overhead as Starlight descended to land beside them, his massive form no longer inspiring terror, but a sense of awe and respect among the assembled humans. "Ready for our flight?" Eliza asked him, already moving to climb onto his back, a movement that had become as natural to her as walking. The dragon rumbled his ascent, and moments later, they were airborne, soaring above the mountain range that now served as a sanctuary for dragons and a place of learning for the humans privileged enough to visit. As they glided on the thermal currents, Eliza reflected on how much had changed because of one simple act of kindness. She had removed a thorn from a wild dragon's claw, an action that any compassionate person might have taken. Yet that small gesture had opened the door to understanding between two intelligent species that might otherwise have remained locked in mutual fear for generations. Below them, the landscape of Eridan IV spread out in all its alien beauty. Forests and mountains, rivers and plains, all bathed in the golden light of the planet's twin suns. It was a world of wonder and possibility, a frontier, not just of space, but of understanding. And as starlight banked into a gentle turn that would take them back toward the sanctuary, Eliza felt his consciousness touch hers with a warmth that had become familiar and cherished. This is only the beginning of what we can accomplish together. Yes, she agreed aloud, her words carried away by the wind of their passage. This is just the beginning. For the girl who had removed a thorn from a wild dragon's hand, and the dragon who had shown her a world beyond imagination, the journey ahead was as vast and promising as the Eridan sky through which they soared, together.